How do we respond when we are faced with fierce challenges and life just seems unfair? In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Shane Stanford. Shane is the president and CEO of the Moore West Center for Applied Theology and JourneyWise. JourneyWise is a ministry that seeks to disciple others while promoting good mental health. Shane has served as a church planter and a pastor, and has written a number of books, including his latest entitled JourneyWise. Together, Shane and I look at how we can reconcile our expectations with the realities that we face in life and ministry. Shane also shares his personal story, which you will not want to miss, of how he has experienced the goodness of God emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and physically as he has wrestled with an intense medical diagnosis. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, friends, and welcome to yet another insightful episode of FrontStage BackStage. I am your host, Jason Daye, and I'm very excited about today's conversation. I believe you all are going to really glean a lot of wisdom from our conversation today. It is an absolute pleasure and honor for me to get to sit down every single week with a trusted ministry leader and dive into a conversation in an effort to help you and pastors and ministry leaders just like you embrace a healthy rhythm for both life and ministry. We are proud to be a part of the Pastor Serve Network. And along with this podcast and this episode, our team also creates a downloadable toolkit for you and your team to dig more deeply into this topic that we're going to dive into today. And you can find that at pastorserve.org/network. There you'll find additional resources. You'll find our Ministry Leaders Growth Guide, again, to help you dig in more deeply. So please avail yourself of that opportunity. Now, we love coming alongside of pastors and ministry leaders at Pastor Serve, and we are offering a complimentary coaching session. If you'd like to learn more about that, you can visit pastorserve.org/free session. If you're joining us on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up and take a moment to drop your name and the name of your church in the comments below. We absolutely love getting to know our audience better, and our team will be praying for you and for your ministry. Whether you're joining us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, please be sure to follow, to subscribe. You do not want to miss out on any of these great conversations. So at this time, I would like to welcome Shane Stanford to FrontStage BackStage. Shane, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here, Jason.
Yes, brother. Now, you've spent the past few decades serving as an effective pastor, as a church planner. You've been pointing people to Jesus. For all of us who have served as pastors, served in ministry leadership, we know that the journey is challenging at times. It can be very rewarding, yet it has its difficulties as well. Yet, Shane, throughout your entire ministry, you've carried an additional challenge, a medical challenge, which has impacted your life. And so, Shane, as we dive in to our conversation today, I would love for you to bring us into your story a bit and share a bit about this additional challenge that you've carried and your life in ministry.
Well, thank you, Jason. And I love what you guys do on your network. It is just so important. And having lived this life, knowing that you have someone you can turn to and someone you can count on to be on the journey with you is so important. So thank you.
Thank you.
I was born a hemophiliac, which for those who don't know is a condition where I don't clot or heal very well. I'm missing parts of the clotting factor that allows for your body to do those things. And so usually it's not an easy life for a hemophiliac just in general, just because of being afraid of getting hurt or problems that you may encounter. But they started in the late 70s. Excuse me, I have a little cold here too this morning. They started in the late 70s making the medicine that they used to treat it. It was a game-changing drug called Factor, and it was made out of human blood donations. And we did not know that the medicines that I was taking, starting, which I guess was around 80 for me, 1980, were contaminated with HIV and hepatitis C. And so at the age of 16, I contracted HIV and hepatitis C both. We found out a couple of years later. And so was told at the age of 16, I told someone, I went to bed one night as president of the class and captain of the golf team, and had been through some difficult things trying to just be a functioning hemophiliac, and then being told the next day that you have about 2 years to live, that I had actually was about 6 years probably into my into the contraction of the diseases. And if that was at a time when there was no medicine, AZT has not come out yet. The group Jason, that I was a part of, hemophiliacs had what was called chapters. And so all the hemophiliacs in that region would come together. And there was about 12 of us in the region where I grew up, and I'm the only one alive today. Everyone else has either passed away from liver disease or from HIV and AIDS. And so I knew that it was going to be a difficult journey. And but I also come from a home of very strong faith. My mother is a true champion of the church, loves Jesus, and really taught me that. That was probably the best gift that she could have given me. And so trying to figure out how to balance my faith and what I trusted going forward versus the uncertainties of what I knew I had to face. That really has been the challenge. And I tell people, in fact, I said this several years ago at a conference to which I was speaking. And by the way, I'm using headphones because we're at my daughter where she just had her new baby. That's first grandchild, and I'm trying to keep as much sound down as possible. So thank you for that. I said that I'm at war with time. I've been at war with time my whole life, being told that you only have so many years left, and then wondering what the next year would bring, the next day would bring. And so went on and decided to try to live as normally as possible as a 16-year-old. I ended up finishing high school, married my high school sweetheart at the age of 20. We thought we had just a few years together. We've been married now 33 years. And so it's been a wonderful marriage, but decided to go to law school. I'm sorry, the way this story comes back around, Jason. Decided to go to law school, got into a theology school that had a law degree and a theology degree together. So it had a law school and a theology school that worked together for a joint degree. And so I thought, I love the Lord. I was feeling a call to ministry and thought I would do both. Well, it took me about a semester, and the Lord did away with the law school part and sent me on through the seminary part, and became ordained, but had not had to tell anybody about my health until I was getting ready to be ordained, and had to fill out a medical form and had to have a doctor that looked through it and all of this. And so I decided to go public with it. And my denomination that I was part of at the time, the United Methodist Church, really struggled with whether to ordain me or not, because it wasn't just about the issues of the theological issues and the demands on being actually the pastor, but we had a death benefit for our pastor spouses. And this is just how human beings work. They were worried that I would die young and they would have to pay for 30 or 40 years this death benefit. And I mean, I was literally told that. Wow. And so I'm confronting these issues of very human concerns and very carnal concerns, also just trying to be a faithful person answering his call. Got through ordination literally by one vote, yes to no, one vote difference. And then I was appointed to my first church out of seminary and was supposed to meet the congregation on a Monday night. They found out about my health on Sunday. I was going to tell them on Monday night, but they found out the day before, had a special meeting, and decided not to take me. They basically, one gentleman was quoted as saying that he'd rather burn the parsonage down than have someone with HIV living in that parsonage. And it was all the fears that if you remember all of that time, it was such a sense of uncertainty and unsettledness. And the church really was a microcosm of some of the worst things that happened in the HIV and AIDS crisis, because the church was always at tension. And thank goodness for Rick Warren and Kay Warren, when they came around in the early 2000s, they really set the evangelical church on a footing to be able to respond not just to HIV and AIDS around the world, but they did it for HIV and AIDS in the United States. And I was able to become good friends with Kay Warren through that, and I'm very thankful to all that they did. But for a while there, it really was, it was a gamble anywhere you went. So I ended up being a church planter and because they literally could not find anywhere else for me to go. And I thought, well, why don't we just do something simple and easy, like starting a church, which
You're
of course
right.
is a complete farce. But loved it, and ended up realizing that I was pretty gifted to do it. Told everybody in the little town where I was appointed to start the new church about my health on the front end. People who didn't like it could come. People who did could. People in the middle could check it out. But we ended up staying there for over 10 years and starting a wonderful church that then led me to go to work in other places. I was in television and broadcasting for the United Methodist Iowa for a while, and then went on to pastor for 20 years in large church. So my whole life, I think the best image, though, Jason, is this sense of not being enough in a world that so often wants you to think you have to be more than you are in order to do the job you're called to. We sometimes forget that pastors are simply human beings who've been given a calling to this vocation. They're not any better or different than any other human being.
Right.
And therefore, we all bring our strengths and our weaknesses and our challenges into the job. With my case, I've just always had my challenges and weaknesses very, very apparent everywhere I went and every step I went. And so it's been a joy for me over the years. The place where I've enjoyed working the most is with other pastors, both who are dealing with health issues and pastors who are not, because I'm able to say to them, look, there literally is nothing that you can face that God can't walk you through, literally. And that all you need to do is give him your commitment. Just show up. He doesn't need help in doing most of the things that he's going to call you to. So,
right.
so that's sort of the background of my story. Most of my problems over the years, Jason, have not been related to HIV. It's been related to the medicines. The medicines that treat HIV and Hep C both are very toxic. I had to have open heart surgery at 36 because of medicines. I've lost my right eye. This is a prosthesis because of a bleed and because of one of the medicines that I was being treated with. I've had some other vision issues. Of course, I've had hip, joint and other problems because of bleeds, and some of the medicines they've tried have caused some problems. So the diseases have been fairly easy to deal with. It's the medicines used to treat them that I've had a lot of trouble with.
Wow, Shane. I know I'm sure everyone watching along, listening along as you're sharing your story, shaking their head like me in disbelief in some of those things. I can't imagine being a teenager and living in the 80s of all times, right? And learning that you've contracted HIV through these medications, because I mean, we look at it one side, there's the medical side of it all, but then there is the stigma attached to that, all of the challenges, the social side, right? So we have a physical medical side, then you have an entire social side, which you experience not only in the world, but you experience in the church itself. I mean, your very first assigned to pastorate, the excitement and a little bit of anxiety that comes along with that for all of us. We all remember our first pastorate, I'm sure, our first ministry role, right? Yeah. But finding out the evening before you're supposed to show up that they don't want you simply because of something that was completely out of your control, right? That's got to be I want to say devastating in some ways. I imagine in that moment, I mean, I don't know what you're experiencing, but I'd love to know, because I think all of us in ministry, maybe not to that degree, but we've all had those moments where the church has hurt us, where the place that we thought, this is the safe place, has caused harm to ourselves or one of our loved ones, our family. Shane, talk us through those, those moments and that time and what you experienced, and how did you navigate that? I mean, how did you continue on and end up planning the church and going into, having a very effective, fruitful ministry?
Well, it's funny that you bring it up, because, and by the way, I'll have to put drops in my eye occasionally, just for those watching. The remaining eye has a condition that And so I won't be able to see you in about 10 minutes. It gets so dry. So I'm sorry about it. I know that there's so many conditions that Shane has to walk through in order to just be on the podcast. I'm so sorry. It's funny you bring that up, because the conversation that I get mostly with young pastors is that they can identify with some aspect, though they may have been perfectly healthy. There is some aspect of the journey that does resonate with every person who's called into ministry, because there's so many unknowns that are in any pastorate.
Mm-hmm.
The sense of, am I truly capable of this? Am I equipped enough for this? Am I going to be the right fit in that circumstance? How do I deal with having this balance between trying to be faithful in ministry and yet at the same time have a life, with my family and enjoying, the things that God puts in my path. When I got rejected, the thing that amazed me was the bishop. We had bishops, and I asked him, I called him that night and said, look, they don't want me. What do I do? And he said, I still want you to go to the meeting. And I thought he'd lost his mind, because, I mean, these are people, who are saying they're going to burn the parsonage down. And I had been, I did not know Ryan White. Most people have heard of or know Ryan White. I know his mother, Jeannie. She and I have spoken on several conferences. I'm 6 months older than Ryan. And
wow.
So he would be, just a little bit younger than me today. And so those were the days when kids weren't allowed to go to school, that they were still burning, kids' houses who are hemophiliacs in Florida. I mean, living in the community. So there was a lot of concern. And here this bishop said, I'm going to make sure you're okay. And we did. We had, a lot of folks that went with us. But he said, you need to go for them, because the body of Christ needs to be reminded of the very essence of what you've been called into ministry for. It needs to be reminded of what you've heard. You don't need to care about what they're saying. They need to be listening to what you're going to say to them. And he says, maybe this has come about not for you to go and be their pastor. Maybe all this happened so that you could go and usher this word of grace and reminder of what their mission is. And I'm still, there was 2 couples there that night who showed up, and I'm still friends with them today, even though I never went to be their pastor. What I saw, though, Jason, was the brokenness in the eyes of a church that knew what they were doing. They felt so emotional about it all, but they knew what they were doing was not right. But they were still headed down that direction because their fear had really become to define them. And whenever we allow fear to define us, we will make the unthinkable decision. We will go the unthinkable direction, because it's so easy for us to get caught up in that uncertainty that we really do we let the struggle kind of take over what are the moving of the Spirit in us. And of course, my first instinct was I wasn't going back to that church either. And he says, you cannot let your fear decide. And that bishop became a very important person in my life, because later, when I did go to be a church planter, he's the reason that I called the local town paper where I was going to be a church planter and got the editor to do a story on my health and put it on the front page. It was a little less straightforward than HIV positive person comes to town, but it was a lot in that same vein.
Right.
And it was the best thing I ever did, because people knew that I wasn't afraid of what God had called me to do. That really it was in their ballpark. Are you going to respond to what God's called and working in this situation? But I will tell you that God always angled people into my path, Jason, at the right moment, no matter what the circumstance was, whether it was a doctor or if it was another medical professional, it was a pastor, or possibly just a random friend that I would make, would always angle into my path at exactly the right moment to be able to speak a word of hope and of strength and of confidence for me. The first 10 years of my diagnosis were really fairly simple, with the exception of things happening from the outside. My T cell count stayed high. My immune system was not having really any effect. There were no medicines really to be on. AZT came out about in the middle of that. And so my main job was dealing with the emotions of other people and the secrecy. Oh my gosh. the secrecy of who you could tell and who you couldn't tell. I remember my mother saying to me after we found out the diagnosis, don't tell anyone. Don't even tell your aunts, your uncles. Don't tell your pastor. And because I wanted to be able to tell Brother Billy. He was the one I wanted to be able to tell. And she said, no. She said, I just don't know how people are going to respond. And it was the first time that I had ever encountered a circumstance where you couldn't say something in church.
Wow.
And one of the ministry divisions of the organization that I'm running now is called No Whispers, and that there should be nothing that you should have to whisper about in church. That you should be able to talk boldly and openly about whatever you're facing, whatever your struggle. Our primary emphasis today is on mental health and wellness. But a lot of that comes from that moment when I didn't feel like I could say the things to the people who I wanted to know, that I couldn't say what I needed to say.
Yeah, that's a whole nother layer of challenge there. And I think in ministry, we often experience that. And we work at Pastor, we work with, ministry leaders and pastors as well, that you're wrestling with something, but there's that fear as to how that might be received. So so we keep it to ourselves, and we know whenever we keep things to ourselves, that isn't healthy for us, isn't healthy for us emotionally, mentally, because we're carrying an unseen burden.
Yeah.
And we have no one that we can really talk it through with. Shane, in your story, it's amazing that bishop, the wisdom of that bishop in that moment. Like you said, it literally changed your life in many ways, because he was willing to lean in, speak into your life, encourage you, come alongside of you. And then you've shared that you've had, just at the right time, different people God's brought into your life.
Yes.
Talk to us a little bit about, because I think one of the things that we wrestle with in ministry too is sometimes we isolate ourselves, right?
Yes, very much.
Yeah. So share with us a little bit about how you had every reason to isolate yourself in so many ways. You know what I mean? Because of what you were trying to keep. Talk to us a bit about those relationships and how God has used that.
Well, the first real relationship that God used in the circumstance was my grandfather. My grandfather was an older farmer. He just a good old country guy, didn't have a lot of education, but was very wise to the world. And he would never say the letters HIV. He would never say AIDS. I don't think he could bring himself to say it. I was always the apple of my grandfather's eye. And when he found out, and we would play a lot of golf together. We were big golf buddies. And one day after we were playing, we sat down under a tree there at the golf course, and he looked over at me and he said, "So what are you going to do with this thing?" He didn't even say HIV or the diagnosis. "What are you going to do with this thing?" And I said, I don't know if I have much choice. He says, "Oh, you have a choice." And I said, "Well, please tell me." He says, "Well, you can get in the corner and feel sorry for yourself, and you can cry about it." And he says, "And I love you so much, I'll get in the corner and cry with you."
Uh-huh.
He said, "But I think you're going to make every day, every step count, no matter how many you have." And he says, "And isn't that all what any of us can do, is just make every step count?" And so he was the first one that really got me to thinking that none of us are guaranteed tomorrow or the next step. But what we are guaranteed is right now we can be the very, very best witness that we can be for where God is calling us to be and to serve. And so that was a reminder for me. And I did, when I had to be ordained, I had to go through a psychoanalysis that you have to go for a counselor, and they do a psychological test on you. And I told him everything that was going on in my life. And he came back and said, "I think I have to diagnose you as being in severe denial." And I said, "Oh, wow. What does that mean?" He says, "Well, I don't think that you realize everything you're going through." And I just started laughing. I said, "Are you kidding me? I'm very aware of everything I'm going through. I mean, that is not the problem." He said, "Well, but you've made no arrangement emotionally for how you're supposed to deal with it." And I said, I disagree with you, because I feel like that the way I'm dealing with it is to take the next step. I don't forget it's there. I don't imagine it's not there. I don't pretend like it's not there. But what I do is I trust that whatever the next step is that the one who has me in his hands is enough, and would always provide for me. And so that counselor went on and passed me anyway. I'm sure there's been days that I wondered whether or not he should have passed me. But what amazed me is that every time I got to a line, there was always someone else that God brought in. I had trouble forever, Jason, finding a doctor when I was young. I just could not find anyone who I would treat me in the area. I was in South Mississippi, and so we didn't have anyone who specifically treated HIV and AIDS. And I needed someone to do infectious disease. And out of nowhere, I went to I was at some restaurant, saw a church member. He said, "Hey, I just met an old friend of mine that's a doctor here in town now, just moved back, and we went to school together. And he said, you ought to give her a call. She's just in family medicine." I gave her a call. One of her primary specialties in that area, but she wasn't making a big deal about it, was infectious disease.
Wow.
She became my doctor. So that's one of those intersections. I had people who, at just the right time, came along to help me be able to go to college, who could help me to go to seminary, who helped me to take care of that financially. There was always someone that came around that corner. And the thing that I always remembered, and maybe some of your folks will think of this too, Jason, is I was always worried about taking that for granted, though. You know, I wanted to live in a world where I expected that God was going to intercede, but I didn't want to take that for granted. I wanted to make sure that I had done everything that I could do to be as strong and as capable as I could be, but then not to take for granted that God was always providing an intersection, always angling into our path someone who could help us in that circumstance. And so, like that bishop, I did not know Bishop Matters very well before then. We became good friends later after that. But, you know, he had come from a different part of the country, could not figure out why, and this is a true story, he could not figure out why he had gotten appointed to be bishop in Mississippi. He really thought it was the end of the world for himself. He really did. And I remember him, you know, growing to love Mississippi very much, that conference. But he would say later, many years later, he'd say he thought he was sent to Mississippi in order to navigate my situation.
Wow.
And I mean, to hear people talk like that, you really do, when you back up, you go, oh my gosh, he's been working from start to finish. And he's the one that actually started me doing a prayer journal 29 years ago, started doing a prayer journal, still have it to this day. It's about this thick now. But he wanted me to do it so that when I would write down what I was praying for, that years later I could go back and look. And as I go back and look now, I see where God was intervening in every single request, whether I knew it or not, whether he answered it the way I wanted him to or not. He was making that way. And that's the way he's working in all of us.
Yeah, I love that, Shane. And as you share your story, it's obvious God's fingerprints are all over it, like it is with all of our lives. But that's not to say that Shane had this huge experience. He had these big challenges, and God showed up and made it smooth sailing because Shane said, "I'm all in for you, God." I mean, you've obviously had,
yes,
challenges throughout your life, throughout your ministry. And so talk to us a bit about how, in those times of brokenness, those times of struggle, those times of, man, can I just catch a break? When you experience those Shanes, what sustained you in both life and ministry in those moments?
Well, it's interesting. I'm at a stage in my life, which is I'm probably more at peace today than I've ever been, and content, just because I can look back and see where God was intervening. There have been so many days, Jason, that if you would have caught me, you would have thought, oh my gosh, that is the worst pagan I've ever encountered in my life. The way he's responding, man, he is angry. And it wasn't so much that I never got to a place where I shaking my fist to God. I got to places where I wish that he could shake his fist with me. I was really calling out to him. I just need to know you're there. And when I look back, I can see he was there. And so this far down the journey, I'm able to say to people, absolutely, he was there at every angle, every intersection. I know that now. I see the evidence of it. But at the time, I had to trust that the word he was sending me at that moment, whether it was through a friend or whether it was through scripture or devotion or writing, whatever it might be, that word was a reminder and that it was true and that I could count on that word. There are moments, though, in our lives, and I've faced several of them, where you get to a point where you go, okay, no matter what, Lord, I just can't do this. I am not strong enough to do this. Those seem to always be the the safe word, I call it for, for my faith. When I got to a point where I said, I am not enough, is usually where I saw God show up the most vividly. But when I was trying to be more than I was at the time, or trying to be the one who had all the answers, oh my gosh, my wife and I went through a terrible time in our marriage during church planting, because I was spending so much time trying to prove to people that taking a chance on a HIV positive pastor, I was working myself to death, which means that I was also ignoring her. And we had tried to start having a family at the time. And I remember thinking to myself, it does not matter what you accomplish out here. If you don't have peace in here, if you're not listening to what he's saying and working and moving in here, Shane, it doesn't matter what you accomplish out there. And that's the thing that more than anything, when my wife and I go talk to marriage conferences, it doesn't matter that I've been a person with all these illnesses or what the circumstance has been. Everyone in that room who's in ministry together knows what that's like. To know that your spouse that there's a third person living, or a third being living in that relationship with you, and it's the church.
Right.
So many times, and it's hard for us to figure out where the church goes in our marriage and where the church goes in our relationships. God has intended, I think, very much for people to be in ministry together, but not both people are called in the same ways, the same places, and to the same degree. And therefore, I realized that my relationship with God and my wife's relationship with God was the real conduit by which I could be a good pastor. I couldn't try to do that in spite of or instead of. I had to be able to, I became a good pastor first because I was trying my hardest to be a good husband and a good father. And once I got that priority in line, that too, I could look back and see where God had sent, just the right person at the right time, or interceded in the right way for me. The main thing I've learned, though, Jason, over all of this is that you cannot give up. So many times I've wanted to throw in the towel. I've wanted to quit and say, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. And you can't do that, because that so much is Satan's battle with us. Satan doesn't need to destroy us in order to, he just needs to distract us.
Right.
And that can lead us enough off target that it can cause all kinds of problems throughout. I think I've had a blessing, to be honest with you, with my health, because my health always reminded me of certain things that most people don't get reminded of except in very unusual moments in their life. I woke up every day being reminded of how fragile and how precious time was. And I still made a mess out of it sometimes. But very quickly I could get recentered. And so what I worry about with my brothers and sisters in ministry is them not having to get to that place before they remind themselves every day of who they have, why they have it, and what they're called to be a part of when they live it.
Yeah, that's good, Shane. That's excellent. Shane, all of us in ministry, we have challenges. We've said that. And a lot of times those challenges come, it's for a season or whatever. And, they're there. They're somewhat expected. Some of your challenges, people would look at and say, well, that's unfair. I mean, like, here's someone who has given his life to Christ. Here's someone who's given his life to the kingdom work. And yet he's facing these. And so that kind of unfair piece comes in. And there are others in ministry who experience things that just seem to be unfair. Shane, what would you say to a pastor who finds himself in a season where they're experiencing things that just seem unfair?
That is something I've been wrestling with the last few years. Just to give you an idea, my wife and I have 3 daughters. We were able to go through a procedure that kept them safe and kept my wife safe. And so we're very blessed. But when we filled out our wills the first time, there was a young man that is married to my wife's, would be her sister. They're not sister by blood, but they're definitely have grown up together, been close. And so Uncle Randy, as he was called, was the guy that he was in the will. He and Tracy had custody of the children if anything happened to us. When I went through heart surgery, he's the one that made sure the yard was mowed. He's the one that made sure everything, every detail was taken care of. He's just such a good man. And I can remember him looking at me going, I can't believe how unfair it is that you don't get to, live the same life that I do. 7 years ago, he got diagnosed with ALS and died 3 years ago. Young man, just a wonderful guy. And it was so funny that in spite of all that I've been through, the first thing I did when I got along with God was I said, how unfair this is that he had died with this, that he dealt with this. And so the first thing I would say to people is that feeling like something's unfair is absolutely normal because it is unfair. But remember that the world we live in is not based on fairness. It is a broken world with our physical, emotional, relational, and spiritual lives are all broken. So when sin hit us, everything fell. So I don't think we were supposed to have cancer, but cancer came along in a broken physical world. I don't think we're supposed to have hurricanes, but hurricanes come along in a broken world. And so does, spiritual death and spiritual brokenness. I think what we forget sometimes is that when you live in a broken world, broken things are going to happen. People are going to get sick. They're going to have diseases. You're going to face trials and struggles that oftentimes seem beyond your reach, or it frustrates you because you should have never had to be the one to deal with it. But I've had so many people who've said to me, Jason, boy, I wish I would have given anything if I could have just taken this burden on for you. And one of the things that I always say to people is that don't ever wish to take on someone else's burden. Just wish to be more faithful in the burdens you carry and in the ones you help others carry. Because no one can ever, I've had friends I've been anointed, Jason, in every way you could possibly imagine, in almost every sphere in the universe. I've been in Europe, South America. People have anointed me trying to heal me. And at the end of the day, I'm still HIV positive. But I'm here.
All right.
And the people that have helped me in this very unfair situation have done incredibly kind, fair things for me. They've tried to make a difference even in the unfair, because I know that one day it'll all be fair. I'll be before my Lord. I'll see him face to face. I won't have to worry about tomorrow. But until then, until that day, I do know that I'm not alone in this journey, that not just the Lord who walks with me, but the ones, God's people who walk with me. And so every day I try to do two things. I try to be faithful in my own witness. So I try to do, whatever I can to take whatever I'm dealing with to be faithful. But I call them ARC. I just try to do an act of random kindness every day for someone to help make their journey a little more fair. And I've been doing this now for 17 years. It started out of a Bible study I was a part of in Florida many years ago. And it amazes me how every day God just whispers back, see there, see there. See how you are able to make a difference in that person's life. You don't want any credit for it. You're not trying to get any accolade for it. You may not even make a lasting impression about it. But in that moment, you got to help make the world just a little bit easier. And if we would do that for each other, I think what we would find is there would be so many fewer people going, boy, that's not fair. And more people going, thank you. And just this idea of gratefulness. I tell people all the time, because I do minister to a lot of pastors, and I will say, look, you're like a politician who has to go through an election every week. Because after your sermon on Sunday, they're voting at Sunday lunch, trust me. And I do know that's easy, and things don't make sense a lot of times. But remember, the audience you have to be most contented with is the audience of you and the one you follow. Because you'll know if something's right or not right in that situation. Right. And then you're also listening to those you've brought around you to help be that voice with you. I said, the number one thing you need to worry about is, how can I be that faithful witness? And how can I do an act of goodness and fairness to someone to just make their journey a little bit better? I could not spend too much time worrying about fair and unfair. because it can consume you and it will weigh you down to where it's like I talk about with Satan. It distracts you and it will cause you to miss that day, maybe that one thing that could have intersected into your life that could have been the best thing you did or experienced that day. I don't know if that answers your question.
That does. That's powerful, Shane. Very powerful. Thank you for that word. Brothers, as we kind of wind down, just a couple things. One, you have invested a lot of time in the Beatitudes.
Yes.
And that has become a big part of obviously your life, your ministry, and you're sharing that with the world through JourneyWise, the ministry that you're in at this season of life, and recently a book that you've written on it, including a devotional book in addition. Talk to us just a little bit about how do the Beatitudes relate to this entire conversation that we're in the midst of?
Sure.
How does it relate to us, overcoming the brokenness that we're experiencing and those types of things?
Well, for like most people, the Beatitudes were good for refrigerator magnets and for keychains. I mean, they had a good poetic verse to them,
right?
And that's how I viewed them. And then my grandmother, I talked about my grandfather earlier, but my grandmother, my mother's mother, my grandfather is my dad's father. And the reason that matters is what I'm about to tell you. My grandmother died about 17 years ago. And I knew she had a hard life. And she would use this phrase, JourneyWise. And so I can remember being a teenager and going, what does that mean? And she would say, I would rather learn something from every step along the way than to have been born the wisest person on the planet. And she would always reference Solomon, how born with wisdom doesn't mean you're actually learning how to be wise. Good. And so she would use that phrase. Well, my grandmother, her husband, my mother's father, was murdered when my mother was 10, and my grandmother was pregnant with her fourth child. It was a terrible situation. Guy started setting forest fires. My grandfather was a forest ranger, went to stop him, and he shot him. And so my grandmother ended up having to ride 3 nights a week, 45 minutes each way in the back of a laundry truck to go get her degree to be a teacher. And so 4 children, just trying to make the world work. She ended up becoming a teacher and teaching for 40 years. And so I would hear this example of being JourneyWise, making the most of every circumstance. When she died, I found next to her bed 5 different translations of the Beatitudes. One was King James, the other was New American Standard, NIV, the Message, and New Living Translation. And so I didn't ask my cousins. I'm sure I'll stay in trouble for this for a long time, but I just took those translations and put them up on the wall of my study, and for a year read the Beatitudes just to see what my grandmother was doing, reading 5 translations every day of the same scripture. And over that year, I realized that the Beatitudes were not just the preamble to this amazing Sermon on the Mount, but it really was the start of Jesus's wisdom values. If you look at the Beatitudes, they really do line out as sort of the core principles of what Jesus will teach on at other places throughout his ministry. And at the same time, Jason, it was during the WWJD movement, where everybody would say, what would Jesus do? And the one problem that as a pastor that I would find in that movement is that the reason most people couldn't really use what would Jesus do is because they had not taken much time to actually know what he did and what he said, And so we created the JourneyWise discussion first by looking at this very specific part of Jesus's teaching ministry, the Beatitudes, as the start of the start of when he began to be a teacher. And what we discovered is that it is this amazing set of not just principles for living, but it really is a bridge that allows for us to connect both the Old Testament and the principles of this new gospel together. And you really do learn as much, not just about Jesus's teaching, but you learn a lot about what Jesus considered to be important. Being able to be fully present with the Lord, totally, completely destitute in spirit, so that the less of you is there, the more God can fill up. Hungering and thirsting like a person, not just like I get hungry during the day because I've only had 2 meals, but a person who's not had meals in days, having that kind of hunger for justice and righteousness. Being a peacemaker, not just a peace lover. What does that mean for our world? And then after you do those first 7 Beatitudes, we notice that Jesus was very, very straightforward with us. He said, oh, by the way, the 8th one is, you will be persecuted. If you do the first 7, you will be persecuted. He was very, very upfront about that. And what we try to do in that is to show people how in the daily awakening of just knowing what God is doing around you and whatever the next step of your life is, that he's building something in you, a set of lessons and a sense of being able to not just receive the world, but to enter the world, so that no matter what's happening to you, you're always witnessing for him. You're always doing the thing that matters most as a follower of Jesus. And so the Beatitudes is a great start. We then went on and created what you mentioned earlier, a 360-day journey with Jesus, where we took all 4 Gospels in the first chapter of Acts, put them in chronological order. And so in 1 year, in 4 90-day sections, you read all the Gospels in a year in chronology of the ministry of Jesus. But the Beatitudes is sort of the example of it. What does it feel like to go that deep and to look at the teachings of Jesus from such a practical but also poignant sense of what they meant when he taught them, but still mean today?
Yeah, that's helpful. And because oftentimes, as you said, the Beatitudes seem very aspirational.
Yes.
You know what I mean? They're, you know, a good thing to say, a good thing to repeat. You find yourself in a situation and you talk about blessed are the peacemakers, right? Or whatever, or you're in a difficult time and, you know, you lean on the persecution piece, right? So, but for those to really be values that shape our lives is different. There's a
Yeah.
difference between
Yes.
these as aspirational things and as things that really and what I love in this, Shane, is that there is that piece, so that reality that we will suffer, we will experience,
Yes.
you
Very
know,
much.
challenge and trouble and hardship in life.
Yeah.
Um,
Very
and
much.
yet, and yet,
Yes.
these ring true, and these are what we're called to
Well,
embody.
Jason, I've got a lady who did one of the first Bible studies of this that I ever did years ago. And we got to that first one where, you know, we hear it as blessed are the poor in spirit, you know, and what that Jesus really means there is he uses a word for poor that means destitute. So the more destitute you are in yourself, the more space there is for God to fill up in you, to be more present in you. And I remember I taught it, and every time I see her now, she'll say, you know what, I'm having a pretty good day. There's not much of me in there. But she'll
Oh,
say, boy, I'm having a rough day. There's a lot of me still in there. I'm trying to get more of me out so more God can fill in. And it's given her an image, a way to look at what it means to be present in the power of what it means to be emptied for Christ so that God can fill you up. She gets that now. Well, that was never supposed to be mystical. Jesus just
right.
used it as a way for us to be able to cross the ages with it so that we know what it means to be filled up with him and not filled up with him. So
Yeah.
it has a lot of practical but very important usages.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, brother. Shane, man, your story is so encouraging in so many ways. Just to see again how God's been at work in your life, through your life, and just how you've shared that with so many over the years. As we're winding down, I want to
Sure.
give you an opportunity to share maybe some parting words of encouragement to our brothers and sisters who are serving in ministry.
Sure. I would just like to say to my brothers and sisters that I know the road is long and it's hard. But there aren't many things in this world that are worth doing that aren't long and hard to take care of and face. And what you're doing, I believe, is the hope of the world, because you get to be the witness. You get to be the hands and feet of Jesus in the place where you've been planted. There's going to be so much that's not fair and a lot that doesn't make sense. Trust someone who's been there on the journey for a lot of not making sense. But that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. Even in the things that we don't understand, God shows up and does an amazing work in us and through us, even when we're barely hanging on. And I know that for so many times I felt like I didn't give God enough. And I remember the person who looked at me and said, if you're just available, God will use what you give him. He can change the world by using just what you give him. And it took the guilt off of me not trying to be a certain thing before I believed God could use me. right now where you are, God can use you, and he can make a difference in whatever the circumstance. Write that journal down though. Start documenting every day of your walk as a pastor. So that not only you'll be in the process of that faithfulness, but you'll be able to look back and see the roadmap of where God has led you and how he's gotten you there.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great word, Shane. Appreciate that. If people want to learn more about JourneyWise or connect with you in the ministry, what's the best way they can do that?
Go to JourneyWise.network, JourneyWise.network, or you can go to ShaneStanford.com. Either one of those sites will get you further down the rabbit hole, as they say. We'd love for you to come and be a part of what we're doing. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. And for those of you watching or listening along, we will have links to both those sites in the toolkit for this episode, which you can find at pastorserve.org/network, along with a link to Shane's books. And we'd love for you guys to take a peek at those incredible resources there. Shane, it's been an absolute blessing to have you on the show, to hear your story. Thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for all that you've done to impact the kingdom, and how you're continuing to serve brothers and sisters who are serving in ministry and come alongside and encourage and all that you're doing. Certainly appreciate you making the time to be with us.
Thank you, Jason. What you guys are doing is so needed and so helpful. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, brother. God bless.
God bless you.
Now, before you go, I want to remind you of an incredible free resource that our team puts together every single week to help you and your team dig more deeply and maximize the conversation that we just had. This is the weekly toolkit that we provide, and we understand that it's one thing to listen or watch an episode, but it's something entirely different to actually take what you've heard, what you've watched, what you've seen, and apply it to your life and to your ministry. You see, FrontStage BackStage is more than just a podcast or YouTube show about ministry leadership. We are a complete resource to help train you and your entire ministry team as you seek to grow and develop in life and ministry. Every single week, we provide a weekly toolkit, which has all types of tools in it to help you do just that. Now, you can find this at pastorserve.org/network. That's pastorserve.org/network. And there you'll find all of our shows, all of our episodes, and all of our weekly toolkits. Now, inside the toolkit are several tools, including video links and audio links for you to share with your team. There are resource links about different resources and tools that were mentioned in the conversation, several other tools, but the greatest thing is the Ministry Leaders Growth Guide. Our team pulls key insights and concepts from every conversation with our amazing guests. And then we also create engaging questions for you and your team to consider and process, providing space for you to reflect on how that episode's topic relates to your unique context at your local church, in your ministry, and in your life. Now, you can use these questions in your regular staff meetings to guide your conversation as you invest in the growth of your ministry leaders. You can find the weekly toolkit at pastorserve.org/network. We encourage you to check out that free resource. Until next time, I'm Jason Daye, encouraging you to love well, live well, and lead well. God bless.